Hi everybody, I'm Dr. John Douillard and welcome to LifeSpa.com. And today I want to talk about an article that I wrote recently called something about the soul of Ayurveda. You know, Ayurveda has a couple of definitions. Ayu means life, Veda means science or the science of life, how to live in sync with the natural cycles. Sort of circadian medicine 101, right? You know, when to eat, how to eat, when to go to sleep, seasonal eating. All of us, you know, really do need to be connected to the rhythms of nature so we can go with the currents. Our biological clocks being in sync with nature's circadian rhythms is now Nobel Prize winning science. It's a big deal. You know, years ago, the Western medicine said, well, we're not like animals and birds and whales that have to migrate and connect to the rhythms of nature. We're above that. We evolved beyond that. We don't need to do that. Well, now they found out that was not actually true. We do need to be connected to those rhythms, and it's really, really important. That is the Ayurveda 101. That is the science of life definition. There's another definition I like where Ayur is life and Veda is truth, which means the truth of your life. What is the truth of our life? What is the purpose of our life? And in Ayurveda, I wrote another article a while back called the Purush Arthas, and it's something, Purush means soul, Arthas means purpose, and it's called the 4 aims or goals of life, and it's all for the purpose of the soul. So what's really interesting is that this body of ours is very physical, and we're locked into the physical living and reality, relative experience that we have, right? But from the Ayurvedic perspective, the part of us that continues on, that never actually dies like the body will, is the immortal part of us. So in Ayurveda, they talk a lot about immortality, and it's not like this body of mine is going to live forever, obviously. It is about becoming aware of the part of us that has the potential to live forever, which is your soul. And ultimately, you know, through the practices of Ayurveda, become realized passengers on the journey of the soul. And that this human body is an instrument to be able to perceive subtle energy, to perceive this notion that we have both this body, this relative existence, and this very spiritual existence happening simultaneously, and that it doesn't have to be that you only get to experience your soul when you die. Ayurveda was like, you can experience it now while you're here, if you understand what Ayurveda was really, truly all about. That definition being the Ayurveda, the Ayurveda being the Ayurveda, life Veda being truth, meaning the truth of your life, letting that out, which is why I love Ayurveda so much, right? Because just living the first definition, just good enough to live a healthy life, right? And not get stressed out and burn out and degenerate, in an accelerated way as we age. But the second, just takes us to wherever you want to go. I mean, there's no limit to where that definition can take you, Ayurveda being the truth of your life, right? And so that's what it's about, and that's what the article's about. And some of the important, interesting pieces of it is Ayurveda, and I'm only going to be able to touch on this for a minute because it's not a very long video, is that Ayurveda talks about that the gap between everything is sort of very important. The gap between day and night, sunrise and sunset, the gap between the seasons, those transitional periods are called sandhis or junction points. Ayurveda said that it's so important to recognize that disease takes its foothold, its first bite inside of you during the transition from one season to the next, and how important it is for these seasonal changes to take place. That's what's happening in the fall and the spring, during the equinoxes, and how they were always celebrated, and the solstices, and how they were always celebrated because they were so critically important at a really subtle level. And I think that our ancestors had some radar on this subtle way more than we do today. But the human body is always got the potential to perceive subtle energy even better than most technology does, because we can feel things. And some of us are more sensitive to others, but it's something that can be refined. So understanding that these gaps, like doing seasonal transitions, changing your diet from one season to the next, doing Ayurvedic cleanses during one season to the next to make sure you get rid of the heat and the dryness of summer before you go into the coldness and dryness of winter. Because if you don't, the dryness of summer will amp up the dryness of winter and make you excessively dry out your mucous membranes, which are in your respiratory tract and gut, which are your protective immune barriers. And if they go down, we are more vulnerable, right? So just simple things like that. And I've talked a lot about how all that works in this article at LifeSpa.com about this idea of the soul of Ayurveda, the truth of Ayurveda, I think is really critical. Diving down to the deepest, subtlest junction point, there's a junction point between the unified field theories and physical matter. And so we all, I think, agree that underneath these particles that make us and the things that we touch are underlyingly based on our fluctuations of a field that expresses itself in these particulate ways, right? And there's a junction point where the field becomes physiology. And that junction point is what Ayurveda said is where we can treat the cause of disease. When the field becomes physiology and the physiology forgets that it's a field, that is what Ayurveda calls the cause of all disease. So again, we're at a gap, we're at a junction point, what Ayurveda calls a sandhi, the sandhi between night and day. If you screw that up and you sleep all morning, you never see the sunrise, or you don't sort of recognize or still yourself with a sunset, which is kind of resetting that calm, or making a seasonal transition from one season to the next, whether it be migration or changing your diet or whatever. These are all junction points or gaps or sandhis that Ayurveda really focused in on, which is really interesting, something Western medicine is just beginning to understand. But the junction point between field and physiology that Ayurveda said is the ultimate cause of disease, when the physiology forgets that it's field. Now, what they went on to say was that the field is in fact consciousness, and when the consciousness becomes us, matter, our physiology, and our physiology forgets that it's rooted in consciousness, and those are accepted unified field theories in quantum physics as well. But when the field forgets or when the physiology forgets that it's steeped and sourced in this field of consciousness, this is called the mistake of the intellect, where the cells begin to lose its function and its connectedness to the whole, right? Where if the parts start to function independently without this under a recognition, the fact that we're connected at the deepest possible level, the cells start to go potentially rogue and they start functioning more independently. And, we are greater together than we are apart. The cells function better when they're functioning as part of a whole, a whole syncytium of unity and flow of all the parts going together. When I see patients, I'm constantly connecting the dots of this connects to this, and this connects. All the organ systems connect. You can't say, oh, it's just your liver. You can't say, oh, it's just your heart. It's always connected to the whole. And Ayurveda said when we lose that connection to the whole, that's the cause of disease. But they said it at the most subtle level where consciousness meets matter, and when matter forgets its consciousness, that's the problem. So to fix it, you would put your attention right at the junction point between consciousness and matter, right? How cool is that? Well, how do you do that? Well, meditation will do that. Yoga, breathing, and will do that. Meditation will transcend your thoughts beyond the physical, mental thoughts into a feeling level, steeping yourself in that field of consciousness, right? So all these Ayurvedic tools, Abhyanga, doing a massage, is treating the gap between the outside world and your inside world. That's another junction point. Yoga, breathing, meditation are all tools to accomplish that, which I think is just sort of, just really profound thinking when you think about it. And at that junction point, there are these particles called photons inside of our body, called biophotons, or ultra weak photon emissions. We release thousands of them per second, and we receive thousands of them per second. So we're transmitting them and receiving them. They're called biophotons. I've written a bunch of articles on biophotons on my website at lifespa.com. And these are information carrying particles inside of our body that carry information within us, and they also carry information outside of us at great distances. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, where intention can change how we observe these particles instantaneously at great distances. which means these photons of light travel at the speed of light. These photons are also, if you think about light, it can be a particle, a photon, or it can be a waveform of the visual light spectrum. It's both. So this is one particle that exists at that junction point between consciousness and matter, or field and physiology. So what's really interesting about these biophotons is they exist at that place where Ayurveda said the cause of disease exists, where consciousness meets matter and matter forgets that it's a fact of field of consciousness. And it turns out that these biophotons, according to science, have been shown to be affected by intention. So if you create an intention, it can alter the function and flow of these biophotons. They've been able to change random event generators. So they sort of help us understand how prayer can work, and how prayer can change things at great distances. And there's great science and studies to show that it does that. And there's also studies that shows that prayer doesn't work. Well, it turns out that these biophotons can be incoherent or coherent. In other words, if you still your body and you meditate, you create more coherent biophotons. If you're stressed out, the biophotons are released as a result of oxidation or damage of your DNA, and they're very incoherent. So the theory is that if you were to meditate and then invoke an intention, you're releasing information-carrying particles, according to the science, that are affected by intention, and now you're releasing coherent information particles that are not just inside of your body, that can heal inside of you, and there are mechanisms for healing, and there's studies behind that as well. And when they're incoherent, there are also mechanisms for damage as well. So we have to be careful. So the more that we pull back the bow and still the mind and create these coherent biophotons, and then employ and impart or employ intention, it could be the explanation of how prayer works when you are doing it from a real deep state of, silence and deep prayer, versus being, still not really doing it from the purest place that we can possibly be. So here we are. Once again, Ayurveda talks about how powerful the gaps are, the junction points are, the sandhis are. The sandhi means gap or junction point. And the gap between field and physiology may be the most important one of all. And that when the field becomes physiology and it forgets that it's part of the field of consciousness, it's called pragya, prad, the mistake of the intellect, where Ayurveda described the cause of all disease. Quite profound, a lot of crazy science to back it up, and something that we really get to kind of tune into. So read this article. I think it's really interesting. It's at LifeSpa.com. It's all about the soul of Ayurveda. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. John Douillard. Do you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe and share.
This recording is brought to you by LifeSpa, where ancient Ayurvedic wisdom meets modern science. Get access to free health video newsletters by Dr. John at LifeSpa.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.